Yunha froze in place, realizing that they were all trapped in a trap. Tiger noticed the girl and she gulped. She quickly ran up to Horim and the guy asked why she didn't run to hide behind the gate. The girl replied that she had already become the tiger's prey and would not have had time to do that. Especially, she could not leave people in trouble. She said she'd distract him and the guy stared at her in horror. Unha mumbled that she would try to buy enough time for Horim to carry the injured man away and call for help. She tried to calm the struggling guy down, saying that she'd already acted as bait when hunting with other people, and that she'd be fine. The girls said they were wasting time and that they had to hurry before the tiger pounced on them all. Unha grabbed a large rock and stared at the tiger. She knew the predator would run after a struggling prey rather than one lying unconscious. Finally, the girl burst forward and shouted to Horim to get them to leave. The girl ran through the snowy forest and tried to focus. The snowdrifts and the cold were working against her. She realized that if this huge tiger got into the villa, there would be many casualties before it was defeated. The girl gritted her teeth. She remembered that there was a big rock somewhere nearby and she needed to get to it. Suddenly, she felt her leg twist unnaturally. The tiger leapt towards her, but the girl managed to crawl into the hole between the boulders. Unha was now trapped in a trap. The tiger circled the crevice and growled menacingly. The girl thought she could breathe out and that the tiger would not be able to reach her. But suddenly a muzzle with huge fangs slipped through the gap, followed by a paw and scratched the girl in the face with sharp claws. Una realized that at this rate she didn't have long to live. Suddenly, the tiger roared, a sharp spear thrust into its side. The animal began to scrape its claws over the rocks with even greater fury to reach its prey. Suddenly, everything went quiet, and the girl, numb with horror, opened her eyes. Seo Jihak, with eyes full of despair, shouted and called out to the girl. He pulled her out and pulled her into his arms as tightly as if he was afraid he was dreaming she was alive. The tiger lay nearby, motionless. Una couldn't stop crying and held the man close to her. She confessed to being scared to death and thinking this was her end. The girl stammered and confessed that at some point she had decided that no one would come to her aid. The man was stunned when he heard this. He held her even tighter against him, bile rising to his throat, and he said hoarsely that he could never do that to her. He didn't want to let her go and promised that he would never leave her in distress. Later, the young people were sitting in the room and the man was carefully tending to the girl's wounds. He grinned and said he couldn't take his eyes off her, or she would surely get into a trouble. Then he suddenly took on a thoughtful look and said that perhaps he should punish the two warriors who had failed to drive the tiger away from the villa. Unha instantly stood in their defense, asking them not to do that, and the man exhaled disappointedly. He said he was hurt that after she had to be rescued, she still cared about them. The girl blushed and felt Seo Jihak gently touch her chin with his fingers. There was no way she could get rid of the look of utter despair in his eyes when he found her, as if he was afraid to rub her. The girl thought about the fact that he looked like he was really afraid of losing her, but she couldn't believe it. And as if to confirm her words, the man gently turned her head and kissed her lightly. Una's body instantly relaxed after such an exhausting day. Then she felt the man playing with the ribbon of her clothes with his fingers. She gathered her courage and told the man not to stop. Seo Jihak was pleasantly surprised that the girl wasn't acting like her usual self. The young people sat in a bathtub full of warm water with rose petals. The girl rested her head tiredly on the man's shoulder. Seo Jihak smirked defiantly at the girl and told her not to relax too much, and pulled her close to him to finally turn his thoughts into reality. Youngi sat under guard in the young master's manor and didn't even touch her food. The girl finally realized that despite having worn expensive clothes and jewelry before, this was actually her real place. Suddenly, she heard a noise outside the door and became alert. The door opened, and behind it was Chun-hee. The girl smiled and asked why Youngi looked so scared and lost. The girl sat down and began to tell that she was very surprised to learn that her friend had been sent to the Lord Cho's house. Youngi asked how she could not know about her whereabouts if the eldest Kisang had sent her here herself, but the girl said that no one knows about it. She said that everyone around had been told that Youngi had gone to some good place. She thought the girl had become a concubine of some lord, and that she was very surprised when she happened to find out that it was a young Lord Cho. The girl also said that a few days ago there was a rumor in the city that the prince himself was looking for her. Youngi was in shock. She didn't know what was going on, but then Chun-Li told her that it had recently become known that the residence where Yunha had taken a job actually belonged to the same prince. Then the puzzle in the girl's mind came together. She recalled the events of that unfortunate evening. The girl couldn't believe that the man who saved her from the annoying old man was the same boy. the prince who was present at their father's execution. Yoongi began to frantically wonder what he was up to, and what would happen to her little sister. Chun-Li wrung her hand and asked her to come to her senses. She reminded her that in matters involving nobles, they risked their lives, so she should sit tight and keep her head down. The girl said she couldn't help her, and then handed her a letter and said it was from an old man in a shop outside of town and that she should read it. The letter said she had to give a date and time when she could get out of the villa. The man promised to give her money to escape, and it was the only thing he could do to help her for Una's sake. Yoon was wandering around town when he heard local people talking about how, thanks to Yoongi's younger sister, a huge tiger was caught in the mountains yesterday. He held up a woman's hair clip and froze. The seller began to praise the Lord's taste, but he put the thing back and said he had no one else to give it to. The young man turned and headed away without paying attention to the man's enticing speeches. Then he suddenly ordered the servant to return and buy that piece of jewelry. Yoon remembered the conversation with Yoongi, how the girl desperately begged him to let her go so she could run away with her sister. The man asked her, are they really ready to run away just like that without anyone's help or preparation? The girl replied that all she was asking was to open the gates of the villa deep in the night so she could escape. And that was the end of it. Yoon squeezed the hair clip he had brought and thought angrily that the girls had no idea who they were dealing with. At this time, in the courtyard of the prince's villa, people were crowding round the carcass of a tiger. Gari clung to Yoonha in tears and lamented how lucky the girl was to be alive. Behind showed Horim leading his injured friend, holding his hand under his shoulder. The girl asked how he was feeling, and the man smiled gratefully. He bowed and promised that next time he would be sure to rescue the girl if she was in trouble. Una got embarrassed and said she didn't expect anything in return. Horim also supported his friend and said that if it wasn't for the girl's bravery, many people could have been hurt. He said he would treat her to a red bean rice cake and rice wine, as he knew that was a girl's favorite. As they chatted, they didn't notice the appearance of a figure. Seo Jihak appeared just as the young people were discussing how they could get together for a drink. At the sight of him, the subordinates lowered their heads and stepped back. Suddenly, he threw a cape over the girl's shoulder and said that it was cold today, and she mustn't get cold. And then, to her and everyone around her, surprised, the Lord picked the girl up in his arms as if she were a fluff ball. While Yoonha stared at him dumbfounded, the man nonchalantly said that she seemed to have forgotten that he needed personally to apply the medicine in her body. Later, when they were alone together, Seo Jihak said that he had not realized that the girl was a rice wine drinker. The girl replied that he had misunderstood and that, in fact, her wounds were almost healed. But the man interrupted her and said he would judge the condition of her wounds himself, and then reached into his sleeve and pulled out something. He placed a small roll in front of the girl and told her to open it. Yoonha looked at the painted box with interest. Opening the lid, she saw a small, beautiful dagger. The man watched the girl's interest in the gift and said that it was hers now. He leaned his forehead against hers and with a smile said that from now on she should never run away but hit first. Una felt awkward, not knowing how she could accept such an expensive gift from him. The man was only amused by her dumbfounded look. Suddenly he stood up and, taking the girl by the chin, kissed her cheek. It was a very unexpected and sweet gesture on his part. Then he smirked slyly and looked at the girl and said that she must still be shaking from her encounter with the tiger. The girl stared at him with big eyes, uncomprehending. Then Seo Jihak put his head to her chest and said that her heart was beating very fast. He said that his heart was beating so fast because he was afraid of her, that he thought he would go crazy from the rhythm of his heart. Seo Jihak was standing smoking a casera when he was approached by the villa manager and Yuljae. The elderly man bowed to the prince and said that he respectfully wished to know why he had given such a precious blade to some girl, for he was supposed to give it to Yulia. He was well aware that this blade was a national treasure and had been customized by the emperor himself. The prince listened to the man unhappily. Then suddenly he asked how an ordinary steward dares to ask such questions to a prince. Feeling the heat of the situation, Yulja bowed to the lord and said, although he had been promised this blade as a reward, he agreed that he did not deserve to own something so precious. The man declared that he would endeavor to prove his loyalty. However, he was very concerned about the prince's feelings for the girl and the danger they might bring upon him. Yulja said that since she is not from a powerful family, she may become a hindrance to him in the future. Seo Jihak angrily asked if they thought he was so helpless that he was not aware of his actions. He looked at them coldly and ordered them to shut their mouths. The man turned round and was about to leave and then suddenly asked if Yoonha had gone to town, to which Yulia, without raising his head, said yes. He said he'd put a guard and a maid on her and that they'd go back to the villa immediately after shopping. While Gari and Harim stood outside arguing, the girl entered the shop of the very dressmaker. The woman was very happy to see her again. Una confessed that she actually had a small errand to run for the woman, and the dressmaker immediately guessed that it had something to do with the girl's older sister. Smiling cheerfully, the woman decided she wouldn't say too much to avoid getting herself in trouble, and said she would bring her order in. Unha would like to go to the bookstore, but she's not sure if she'll make it since Seo Jihak let her go into town for a little while. She thought she would try to find out about her sister from the dressmaker. Suddenly, another girl appeared in the shop. She looked at Unya and said she had heard of her and asked if it was really her. And then the girl grabbed her hand and introduced herself as Seo Jihak's sister. She looked friendly and asked if Yunha could have tea with her and chat for a while. After a while, the girls were sitting at a table, and the princess said that the girl looked too tense. Lady Heejin said that because her brother doesn't like to drink tea, a girl probably rarely gets to go to tea parties. Una thanked her for the invitation, but her hands shook as she poured herself tea. She couldn't understand this girl's motives. Suddenly, Heejin said that she remembered her, and that the girl's face hadn't changed a bit over the years. Hearing this, Yunha asked in surprise how she knew her and why she said she had known her for years. The girl calmly sipped her tea and said she remembered Yunha screaming and begging for her father to be spared. She asked if she had already forgotten about it. Unha saw the coldness in the girl's eyes and realized that she wasn't her friend at all. Heejin reminded her that it was Unha's father who had dared to appear at the Kisang house and make a scene, but the girl forgot about it since she was enjoying the prince's attention and trying to get into the imperial family. Una's hands began to shake, but she tried to calm down. But the girl kept talking about how her father's fault Seo Jihak almost died. Heejin angrily said that if she were in the girl's place, and if her father had died this way, she would never stoop to being a lousy Kaseng. And then she said that maybe the girl doesn't know who she's really serving. Seo Jihak is not just her brother. He is also the rightful heir to the imperial throne of this country. Heejin said that Una's father had joined forces with people who conspired against the imperial family and wanted to harm Seo Jihak, so she should get away from her brother. Una sat stunned. She hadn't realized it was like this and didn't know what to do. Barely moving her feet, the girl walked down the corridor and could not believe that her master was the crown prince of the empire. She shuddered at the thought of her father was executed because of him. The girl refused to believe that her father could be a rebel. She was sure he had been slandered. Una didn't know how she was going to return to the villa because she wouldn't be able to look Seo Jihak in the eye after what she had learnt. Then suddenly, she decided that she had to contact her sister at all costs. Una ran down the street because she didn't want Gari and Harim to know she was going out. As she was running, a girl passed by and recognized her and called her name. The girl stopped and turned around. It turned out to be an acquaintance of hers and asked her where she was in such a hurry. Unha replied that she was running to Kazeng's house because she wanted to visit her sister. The girl looked at her anxiously and asked, wasn't she aware that her sister was now living somewhere else? She suddenly smiled strangely and said that she would take her to Yonggi. Then she took Yuna's hand and said they were just on their way, but they had to go without anyone seeing them or they would both get in trouble. Unfortunately, Yuna was too late to suspect something wrong. When she asked the girl if they were going the right way, an unknown man was already running behind them. He approached the girl from behind and grabbed her and put a rag soaked in some kind of liquid on her face. Una felt her strength leave her and her consciousness drift into deep darkness. The whole villa was on its ear, all the inhabitants going round and round shouting in search of the girl. Seo Jihak loomed over everyone like a menacing cloud, and his anger was almost palpable. Yulja informed the lord that the last person the girl was seen with was his sister, then she disappeared. He said the servants had searched every corner but could find no trace of her. Seo Jihak grinned evilly and was already thinking of a plan for revenge. Seo Jihak clenched his sword and thought that's why the girl had been so docile and quiet lately. She was planning an escape. He didn't know why he was so worried about some girl he'd had a few good times with. The man turned round and ordered Yulia to bring the girl to him. He was angry and told him to search the whole country to find Una. He wouldn't stop until he saw her dead or alive. Una woke up bound and blindfolded. She didn't know what was happening to her. At last, she heard the man's voice saying that he had not asked to render her unconscious, but the brigand who had kidnapped her replied that he could not have restrained her otherwise. There was the sound of a blow, and the man shouted that he asked to be careful in this matter. The kidnappers brought a chair for Lord Cho and lifted the girl to bring her to her senses. A man asked the girl if she was really the same Cheonggyesu girl the prince had hired. One of the men took the gag out of her mouth, and the girl bit him hard on his finger. The older man smiled and thought she was a fighting girl. He liked that she wouldn't be bored with her. Since Eunha couldn't see anything because of the blindfold, she asked to be told where she was. Lord Cho folded his arms across his chest and grinned, saying that he now understood why the prince liked her so much. She was so unbridled. The man then said that her sister's life depended on her behavior. So if the girl did what he asked her to do, he would ensure that she and her sister would have a trouble-free life away from this place. When the girl stopped talking, he smirked and said that now they could get down to business. Una heard something fall next to her. A man's voice ordered her to slip the contents of the pouch into the prince's food. It wouldn't kill him, but it would slowly weaken his body. Lord Cho wanted the girl to slowly kill the crown prince with her own hands by putting poison in his food. Eunha screamed in despair that she couldn't do that. The man stood up and paced around her, saying that this was the only chance for her and her sister to stay alive, and told the girl to make the right decision. When he left, he said that if she tried to mess up and tell anyone about it, her life would turn into chaos, and that it would be her own fault. The girl tried to scream but was immediately hit from behind. She felt consciousness slipping into darkness again. Lord Cho came out of the barn where the girl was being held. Suddenly, an elder Kizeng woman came out and asked him what was going on. The man didn't say anything but told her to start gathering some opium. The woman asked in bewilderment what he was up to. Lord Cho replied that he would next take on Doryong since he enjoyed having fun with his father's concubine so much. The woman covered her mouth with her hand in horror, thinking that he had taken Yonggi just to annoy the prince. The man sighed heavily and said that she should be ashamed of herself for failing to cope with raising her only son. He turned round and looked threateningly at the woman, saying that if she wanted to continue running the Kiseng house, she should shut her mouth and do what he told her to do. There was the clinking of broken crockery in the room, and the Lady Heejin crawled back against the wall, looking at her brother in horror. He put the sword to her throat and told her not to waste his time and tell him everything she knew. But the girl tried to resent him anyway. She said he was out of his mind to break in and threaten her with a sword. The blade of the sword came close to her neck. A drop of sweat rolled down the girl's temple, and she admitted she didn't know anything. She said they just had tea and parted ways. Seo Jihak's fury was not extinguished, and he did not put his sword away and growled that he did not give his sister permission to approach that girl. Heejin said that she only sought out the girl to remind her of her low social status and to warn her not to try to win his favor. Because as much as he wanted to, he knew full well that he was the crown prince, and he couldn't mess with someone like her. Heejin sighed and said that it looked like she was too late, because when she saw her in person, she realized that the girl with such clear eyes had clearly become a real problem already. Seo Jihak swung his sword and chopped down the nearest wall. The man's sister thought she was dead, but the man angrily hissed that he only spared her life because he knew it was already hard enough as it was. Suddenly, Yulia showed up and screamed that they'd finally found the girl. Seo Jihak immediately turned his attention and headed for the exit. Heejin exhaled heavily and asked herself why fate was so cruel and unfair to her. Seo Jihak drove his horse at full speed through the snowy forest. He thought about the fact that at first he had treated her as good bait, but later she had demonstrated skills that exceeded his expectations. But what attracted him most were her eyes, as big and naive as his fawn from his childhood. It was something that would stay in his memory forever. So the man tried to hold on to her even when she asked him to let her go. He even tried to pretend to trust her, but in the end, she just ran away from him. When Seo Jihak arrived at the site, he dismounted and asked for a situation report. One of the guardsmen bowed and said they found her abandoned by the hillside. He said all her clothes were torn up like she'd been abused. Hearing this, the blood in Seo Jihak's ears rang with terror. He was also told that there were multiple bruises on her body and face. The man approached the exhausted, unconscious girl and barely touched her cheek with his hand. Seo Jihak was horrified at what had become of the girl. The girl's face was bruised, her body was covered in scratches and abrasions, and her hair was tangled in tangles. He stood up abruptly and took off his cloak and covered the girl with it. Then he walked past Yulia without saying a word. The young man only bowed to him and understood his silent command. The man mounted his horse and rode leisurely back to the villa. His consciousness seemed to be somewhere far beyond this place. In a small cabin surrounded by flowers one sunny day, a man sat on the front porch and read a book to his daughters. Little Eunha smiled cheerfully and said how much she enjoyed listening to her father's voice. Yonggi smiled as brightly as the sun shone, and their little family was happy. The man gently hugged his daughters and told them that he reads so well because he has such wonderful and loving daughters. Suddenly, the vision shifted, and the little girl found herself all alone in pitch blackness. She started looking around in a panic, calling out to her father and older sister. Suddenly, footsteps were heard behind her, and she saw a boy walking slowly towards her. His eyes were blind, and bloody tears were running down his cheeks. He reached out his hand to the girl and asked how she could do this to him. Una woke up in a horrible sweat and gulped for air. She turned her head and saw the concerned faces of Gari and Horim, who immediately rushed over to her and started asking if she was all right. Gari carefully helped the girl up. Her whole body was aching, and she didn't remember how she had ended up in the villa. Una looked around and realized that she had changed into clean clothes and her wounds had been treated. She asked what had happened. An angry Gari replied that she should be the one asking the girl what the hell happened. She started shouting at the girl, telling her off for doing such a stupid thing as running away. Una stared at her incomprehensibly and asked what kind of escape they were talking about. Horim intervened in the conversation and said that they were waiting for her outside the dressmaker's shop. But she disappeared and they couldn't find her anywhere afterwards. The girl pressed her hand to her chest and explained that she wanted to see her sister, so she wanted to make a quick run to Kiseng's house. She grabbed Gari's hand and began to assure them that she never planned an escape and asked them to believe her. Gari said with excitement that she had no reason to explain to them, but their lord had turned the whole villa upside down and was worried about the girl's disappearance. She said that everyone around her thought the girl had decided to run away, and the lord was very angry about it. So now they're even more worried about her. Unha felt guilty in front of these people because they had made it easy for her to adapt it in the villa, and now she had fallen into a trap because of her stupidity and made them worry. Suddenly, she began apologizing to her friends for her carelessness. She recognized that as urgent as it was, she should have warned them of her plans. Then she looked up and asked if the Lord had punished them because of her. The young people shook their heads negatively, and then the girl took Una's hand and said that her well-being was more important than anything else, and asked if she was okay. Gari leaned towards her and whispered softly that she was sorry that the girl had been abused by those brigands. Unha listened to her sensations and dug into her memory. She was sure that those men had not done her any harm other than a few blows. She would have felt if they had done anything else to her. Horim told the girl that when they found her in the woods by the hills, their lord was very displeased. Although he was worried about the girl, it was obvious that he was angry with her. He explained that what a man hates most is betrayal. So he was sure that their lord's heart had suffered a severe blow because of the girl's decision to run away, and that he had lost confidence in her. Horim said that's why the lord created a personal warrior squad of ghosts. He explained that it was a group of soldiers selected personally by the lord who always remain hidden from human eyes like ghosts. Its members are chosen in secret and do not serve emperor or country, only the lord. Their most important feature is their unquestioning loyalty. They will never betray their lord, and their main mission is to protect his life. Horim said that the girls may have heard him being called the Shadow of the Lord, but he personally has not yet become part of this unit as he is still young and inexperienced. Then he added that perhaps it was also because he had told the Lord that he would protect Unha no matter what. Hearing this, the girl was surprised and upset that because of her, Horim might not get the chance to be part of the secret squad. The man went on to say that he had heard that this was why the young lord had come to this villa. He had been betrayed by someone very dear to him, and that someone is still trying to hurt him. A chill crept up the girl's spine. Una thought that perhaps those who were threatening him now had something to do with his past. Yulje stood guard in Seo Jihak's room and asked what the Lord was going to do about the fact that they found poison in the girl's possession. The man listened to him intently. He had not been able to sleep well for days, for they had found a pouch of poison sewn into a secret pocket in Una's clothes. He grinned and exhaled smoke from the kitsuru, saying that it wasn't at all like Yulia to stand guarding his lord at night in his own room like a babysitter. Yulja thought silently, trying to gather all the knowledge he had. In the end, he expressed his opinion that he did not believe the poison he had found belonged to the girl, and that she probably didn't even know about it. More likely, her naivety was taken advantage of by someone with malicious intent. Seo Jihak pondered smoking casera and said that someone could have gotten to her and seduced her into helping her escape in exchange for her giving him poison. Isn't that a possibility too? The man himself was surprised that even after she tried to escape from him and possibly kill him, he still hesitated to execute her? Or not? Yulja said that if it turned out that this girl had attempted to assassinate the Lord, he would execute her. To which the Lord grinned and replied that after that he would execute him personally. The man came over and opened the window, saying he had another task for the warrior to do. He said he was going to have a big party at the villa and that Yulja would need to bring lots of Kiseng and other people. Suddenly, he noticed something in the courtyard and quickly dropped Kitsera on the floor and rushed out of the room. Una ran over to what was left of her former clothes. Only ashes remained where the fire had been. She started digging through the ashes in tears, getting her hands dirty and trying to find something. Suddenly, she heard a steely voice behind her asking what she was looking for. The girl turned her head with a thudding heartbeat. Seo Jihak towered over her and, with an indifferent, cold tone, asked her what she was looking for in the pile of ashes. The girl lowered her head and faintly mouthed that her dagger given from him was gone. A stunned Seo Jihak asked her again if he had heard correctly. The man didn't expect her to come poking around here looking for the dagger. He squatted down and looked at the girl's crying face, asking her that if she had lost him, why was she looking in a pile of ashes? And why would she even bother with something like that? Una sighed heavily and quietly replied that it was precious to her as it was a gift from her lord. Suddenly, the man reached out and gently touched her chin, turning the girl round to face him. When she looked up at him with tearful eyes, the man said he didn't understand what he really wanted from her. He asked her why, now looking at her, his chest was clenched in shattering pain. Una looked at him silently and thought about how she didn't remember meeting him before all this. But she knew he had something to do with her father's death. And so she knew with her head that they couldn't be as close as they used to be, especially since he was the crown prince of the empire. But still, when she felt his familiar warmth, she couldn't hold back the tears. The girl folded her hands in her lap and said that she thought the man was going to get rid of her because he had never visited her during the time she was unconscious. Hearing this, Seo Jihak smirked and lifted her under his elbow and asked if she expected him to treat her personally. Anger boiled up in him, and he started going at her, saying that even if he didn't come round, it didn't mean he wasn't worried about her. Seo Jihak loomed menacingly over the girl as she stumbled and fell to the wooden floor. He said he would always take care of her. Yunha looked at him with huge eyes, her heart leaping out of her chest. The man leaned over to kiss her and said that he was very good at taking care of people in his own way. Then suddenly he grabbed her hands and pinned her to the floor, demanding answers. He wondered if him wasn't enough for her, and she had decided to run away, or if she had realized she was in love with him and was afraid of her feelings. Una tried to break free from his grip, but he was stronger. She looked him in the eye with defiance and told him that he may not believe her, but she never planned to run away from him, and that she was true to her words. Seo Jihak smirked and said that since she was saying that, maybe he would believe her. Then his hand went down. The girl tried to resist because she was afraid that someone might see them, but he smiled slyly at her and said that none of his servants would dare to disturb them. Anger still fueled his blood, so he said she shouldn't think too much about unnecessary things. He had seen the things hidden in the secret pockets of her clothes and wanted to ask her many questions. But now he wanted to expel the anger that had built up in him. This time the girl could feel that desire and resentment towards her were struggling in him. It was like he was trying to punish her. At the same time, his gentleness was confounding. It was as if deep in his heart he was as lonely as she was, so she couldn't hate him. And every time she caught his eye, she could see that something was hurting him. At that time, Yoon came to the secret meeting. The men were discussing the fact that they had received invitations to a party at the prince's villa. It was a good opportunity for them to scout the situation personally. Yoon asked if there was any information about Unha. The man replied that he had tried to get in several times, but the villa was very well guarded. He knows only that she is treated more like a guest than a servant, and that she often goes out in the Lord's company. The man also said he'd noticed that the atmosphere at the villa had become tense of late, so the man was going to take advantage of the invitation and go to the party to get a good look at the villa inside and out. Then he suddenly asked if Yoon had already seen his fiancée. At this time, Lord Cho stroked his beard contentedly, looking at the young beauty who was soon to be his son's wife. The girl was about to leave the residence when she stopped suddenly. She saw a young girl carrying a basket of laundry. Her dry, scratched hands immediately caught her eye. She wasn't used to hard work, but for some reason she'd been given this task. Yoongi was about to leave when suddenly a girl called out to her, asking her to stop. She held out a small stone wrapped in cloth to her. Yoongi stared at it incomprehensibly, and the girl explained that it was inappropriate to walk around with such a pretty face and such injured hands. She said a girl could heat it in the stove and then warm her hands so they wouldn't be so dry. Yoongi didn't know her, but thanked her and felt uncomfortable that a stranger was paying attention to her. The girl just smiled sweetly and said she hoped to meet her again. A few days later, Yoonha went out into the courtyard and was surprised at how busy everyone around her was, and running around here and there. She went up to Gari and asked what all the fuss was about. The girl stared at her and asked if she knew what day it was. Hearing no reply, the girl stated that today was their lord's birthday. Yoonha was very surprised. Gari said that everyone has so much to do today that she has no time to just stand around doing nothing. She handed the girl an apple and said she had to go. Unha looked regretfully at the apple and thought that she had no way of knowing about such a thing because no one had told her anything about it. The estate manager suddenly appeared and said he had something to discuss with the girl. He took her aside and told her that as she already knew they were expecting a lot of guests for tonight's party, so she'd better stay out of sight today. The man also told her not to even think about running away again, but to stay in her room and sit quietly like a mouse. He stated that he knew how the Lord favored her and he didn't like it. He thought it was not good for the Lord to be so attached to a girl like her. Una thought about the fact that this man had come with the Lord from the palace, which meant that he, as well as the warriors of the Ghost Squad, put the Lord's interests first. The old man stared perplexedly at the silent girl, when suddenly she asked if he had ever heard of a book reader named Li Hongju. The girl bowed her head and said she wanted to know if he remembered her father and if it was true that the young lord had something to do with his death. When the manager heard this, he immediately shouted at the girl, called her names, and said that he knew she reminded him of someone. He said the girl is actually a poisonous plant pretending to be a beautiful flower. Una's eyes filled with tears, and she quietly said that she just wanted to know something about her father and that he was just an ordinary book reader. She went on to say that her father had not even had time to finish his own manuscript, and that if a man judges him so soon and considers him a criminal, he is an ignorant man and will someday regret it. At this time, one of the brigands pressed his hand to the bleeding wound. He wondered what kind of monster had slaughtered all of his associates and didn't blink an eye. And just at that moment, a young and stately man with a stern look entered the room. He recognized him as the Emperor's son. Yulja gently handed the man the dagger and informed him that he had found it among these people's belongings. Seo Jihak took it out of its sheath and made sure it was the same dagger he had given to Yunha. He took it comfortably and in a steely voice asked the male survivor who had ordered him to attack the girl. The bandit felt like a small gnat trapped in the web of a huge spider. He realized that information was the only reason he was still alive. Seo Jihak foresaw that the man would try to harm himself. So, in a flash, he ran up to him and grabbed him by his lying tongue. He wasn't going to leave today without answers, but he still couldn't hold back his anger. The man handed the dagger back to Yulia and asked his opinion on how long these men had been following them for. The young warrior replied that he thought they were somehow connected to someone from the imperial palace, because all the mercenaries come after the Lord only because of issues with the succession to the throne. Seo Jihak sighed and said that he didn't think that so many rats would breed around him, and then asked what to do with the girl who handed Yunha over to the mercenaries. Yulja replied that so far she has been useful to find the culprits, and that he has closed her separately for now. The young lord ordered Yulja to make sure that everyone involved in this incident was afraid to even breathe. The price for trying to take away Seo Jihak's property is very high, and the guilt can only be made up for by bloodshed. The man went outside and put his face in the rain. He looked at it and thought to himself that Una had been honest with him. She really wasn't trying to escape. Meanwhile, all the counselors had gathered round the table and were speculating as to why the prince had not yet arrived. Unha hoped to see Seo Jihak and hid nearby, but the man was still gone. Suddenly, the girl remembered a conversation with the estate manager. The man said he was aware of what was hidden in her clothes and that he only turned a blind eye because the young lord did nothing about it and continued to care for her. But then the girl's attention was attracted by female voices. They were girls from the Kiseng house who had come to entertain the prince's guests. After some more time, Yulia appeared in the courtyard of the villa, practically dragging the young lord on top of him. Seo Jihak was weak. He was leaning on the man and barely moving his feet. Suddenly, the man noticed the girl's frightened face and smirked. He managed a short chuckle and felt himself losing touch with reality. Seeing the prince falling to the ground, the girl rushed to his aid. Panic and fear flooded her. Soon, Yunha was sitting in the man's room tending to him, changing his compresses and waiting anxiously for him to wake up without leaving his side. The girl anxiously watched his heavy breathing and thought about how clueless she had been. After all, she mumbled that every time she was near him, she had some unknown feeling, not fear or sadness, but something else. Una sighed tiredly and thought about what would have happened if she had originally told the man that she needed to see her sister urgently. Perhaps none of this would have happened. She was still worried about Yonggi and hoped her sister wasn't trapped like she was. The girl folded her hands in her lap and began to mutter that she was completely confused and didn't know what to do now. Seo Jihak stood in the middle of a field of purple flowers and admired the sunset. Suddenly, a baby deer came up to him, and the man kindly reached out his hand to the animal, hoping to pet it. Then in a flash, Yunha was in the place of the fawn. The girl put her cheek under the man's hand and covered her eyes and savored his touch. She looked like a beautiful vision. And suddenly, at some point, the man heard the girl say it was time for them to say goodbye. He tried to figure out what was going on and stared at her disbelievingly. Then suddenly, the wind picked up the petals and began to carry them high into the sky. And with them, Yunha dissolved into the air. The only words that could be heard were the girl's words that she no longer wanted to be at his side. Suddenly, Seo Jihak opened his eyes and came to his senses. He looked around and realized the girl was nowhere to be found. Panic gripped him, and he couldn't get enough air in his chest. He jumped up from his seat and went to her room, but it was empty too. The man ran out into the yard as he was, barefoot in his underwear. But he felt nothing around him but overwhelming panic and resentment. Was she really going to run away from him this time? Seo Jihak, breathing heavily, made it to the main gate. Una heard a noise behind her and turned around and froze in shock. The man ran up to her and hugged her as if he would die without her. Relief filled his body as he breathed in her familiar scent. Then suddenly he started shouting like a madman, asking where the girl thought she was going so early in the morning. Unha, not understanding what had come over him, replied that she always got up so early and that she was just going to go to the mountains to get some medicinal herbs. Her cheeks flushed and she said, embarrassed, that she would be back in a couple of hours. Then suddenly the girl noticed that the man was standing in the snow barefoot in his underwear and screamed, "How could he be so irresponsible?" Seo Jihak covered the girl's eyes with his palm and rested his face against the back of her head, breathing heavily. His voice trembled when he suddenly asked her to always stay by his side. Though he tried to joke that instead of climbing the mountain, she'd be better off climbing him instead, there was bitterness in his voice. He hugged the girl tightly and asked her never to disappear from his sight again. The next day, the bodies of the hired men were found at Lord Cho's residence. The elderly man pressed his lips together in displeasure and said that it looked like the prince and his secret detachment had reached them. He stepped closer and saw a message on the chest of one of the men with a warning for him. Then the lord discreetly told his son to watch carefully here and memorize that this is the whole point of the royal family. The young man was saddened by the picture. He didn't understand why he should organize such intrigues and risk people's lives at all. When one of the servants tried to tell him that one of the men was still breathing, the lord roared and told them to get rid of them. The man lowered his head dejectedly and replied that all would be done as the lord commanded. At this time, Lord Cho told Yoon to follow him as he had an important conversation with him. He put his hand on his son's shoulder and said that the girl he was to marry was already waiting to meet him. The young man felt trapped. The girl and the young man sat in front of the older man and listened to his instructions. He said that they would get married in the spring, and if they fulfilled their duties diligently, they could go to the capital in the summertime. Lord Cho looked at them sternly and said that during this time they should learn to show sympathy for each other, at least in public, to avoid unnecessary rumors. The girl and the boy sat silently listening to the man without being able to contradict him. Yoon was worried that if he left for the capital, Yoongi would be left in this place all alone with no one to protect her. Lord Cho apologized to his future daughter-in-law for not being able to have breakfast together due to circumstances in the yard, and the girl was sympathetic to it. She apologized and said she'd leave first. When she was leaving, Yoon whispered to her to take a look at it. The girl nodded understandingly. A young lady was walking through the courtyard accompanied by an elderly woman. Suddenly, she asked her if the woman knew where the girl was being held in confinement and asked her to take her to it. An elderly maid tried to dissuade the girl, but she only looked at her sternly and told her to lead the way. Yoongi lay on the floor of her dungeon room and stared blankly at the stone presented to her. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open and she saw the very same girl. She came in and said that apparently the rumors were true. Yoongi didn't understand what was going on. She wanted to ask the girl, but she said that she didn't have much time and that no one should know that she was visiting her. The girl said she knew the whole truth about what was going on between her and the young lord. And Yoongi lowered her head guiltily. She wanted to justify herself, but the girl interrupted her and said she wasn't accusing her of anything. Suddenly, the young lady took the girl's hand and said she wanted to ask her for a favor and asked if she would be her personal maid. Yoongi stared at her dumbfounded. At this time, the girl kept saying that she could use the influence of her name to free her, to help her escape. She said that after arriving in the capital after the wedding, the girl would help her disappear, and that if she didn't believe her, she could verify her words all she liked. Yoongi really wanted to grab this chance, but she couldn't understand why this girl decided to help her, afraid if it was a test from Lord Cho. The girl looked Yoongi in the eyes and said that she can trust her since she has a plan, and for that she needs both of them. her and young Lord Yoon. She asked the girl to trust her. Eunha sat on the doorstep and made her shoes comfortable. Seo Jihak suddenly appeared and asked if she was going to go to the mountains again. The girl didn't answer, but asked if he was feeling well enough to go for a walk. To which the man asked if she was so worried about him. He reached up with his hand and gently stroked her cheek. She immediately blushed and became embarrassed. The man asked her what made her go to the mountains all the time. Suddenly, Yuna looked around to see if anyone had seen them. The man wondered why she was suddenly behaving this way. The girl took a couple of steps back and answered that she used to go to the mountains from dusk till dawn, hunt and gather medicinal herbs, and afterwards she worked in a bookshop. She replied that she was starting to forget about that time, so she just wanted to do something familiar. Seo Jihak nodded understandingly when he heard this. Then suddenly he asked her to go hunting with him. Una looked up at the man with her big eyes full of hope and joy. She thought she heard wrong. Seo Jihak leaned towards her face and said with a smile that he wanted to breathe fresh air with her and not think about anything. Last night, a man received a report from Yulia about someone will try to sneak opium into the Lord's party. Seo Jihak replied that everything is going according to plan. Ever since he brought those Kasangs to entertain those oafs, everything has been working out just as he expected it to. Yulja voiced his concern for the Lord's well-being, as he had become very weak since the last poisoning. He looked anxiously at the master and said he was worried about his eyesight. Seo Jihak sadly said that sometimes his vision is almost completely gone, but so far he sees more often than not. He glanced at Yulia's concerned face and said that at least his face he could make out. The man continued to sit and ponder what would happen next to his lord. Una turned round and called out to the man asking if he was all right. The man came back from his thoughts. He grinned and replied that he wasn't someone who needs to worry about. Seo Jihak walked past the girl and said that this outfit suits her very well, and her cheeks instantly turned red. Una did feel comfortable in her hunting clothes. She was sure that the man had taken special care to make the clothes fit her, as she knew that men's clothes did not come in such small sizes. The girl ran up to the Lord and asked him if he had already decided who he was going to hunt. He turned around and said he hadn't decided yet and asked what about her. The girl replied that she used to hunt beasts that attacked the village, so as long as no one threatened her, she didn't know who to hunt. Then the man asked if she thought animals did it just to survive. The girl stared at him in amazement. Seo Jihak took the muzzle of her gun and pointed it at his chest, saying that no matter how she justified her actions, killing any living thing is just a matter whether she or they die. Nothing more. Nothing less than that. The man claimed he never hunted for fun. He only hunted first those who were going to hunt him. And in this, he thought they were alike. The girl sadly realized that the Lord was partly right. Suddenly, the girl raised her rifle and took aim, then called loudly to the man. Her gaze was cold and impassive. A bullet whistled past the dazed man and startled the wolf that was creeping up from the back. The animal was frightened and hastened to hide in the woods. Seo Jihak looked at the wolf with interest and then at the girl. She lowered her head and said that, as he could see in marksmanship, she still needed to practice. Una said he shouldn't compare her to himself because she can't reach him. The girl put the gun behind her back and plucked up courage to ask why he hadn't said anything about the things found in her room. She knew he'd seen them anyway. Suddenly, the man approached her and bent down to ask if she was going to use them against him. The girl knew that although they hadn't known each other long, she had grown attached to him during their time together. So she replied that she could never hurt him. Seo Jihak said he didn't ask her about the poison or the letter because he trusted her. Such a revelation shocked the girl. She didn't expect to be able to count on such a thing after all. Something inside her blossomed. The man passed by and said that if she wanted, she could tell him her story now. After all, she knew a lot about him, even a secret about the state of his eyesight. He stopped and took the gun more comfortably, saying that in truth he had never been completely blind. With those words, the man took aim and asked if she knew why many nobles and officials still believed that a blind prince like him was as good as dead. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, and one of the passing birds began to fall lifelessly to the ground. Yuna couldn't believe her eyes, trying to understand how he had managed to shoot such a small target at such a height. Seo Jihak said that even though many could tell the truth, none of them survived. Because he took their lives before they could open their mouths. That's why he's still alive. The girl listened to the man and realized how much they were alike, and that they both had a hard fate. Before she knew it, the man had come close to her and was hugging her tightly, leading her away. Unha felt urged by his movements. She tried to calm him down, saying she was sweaty and dirty, but the man acted like a predator, cornering her and said he wasn't going to tear her clothes off. Without giving her another chance to speak, he pressed her against the tree trunk and covered her lips with his own. When he finally pulled away from her, the girl was breathing heavily. Seo Ji-hak knelt down with a mischievous look at the girl. She tried to stop him, but the man only asked her to stay out of his way and left a gentle kiss on her palm. Turning his devious plan into reality, the man licked his lips contentedly. Seo Ji-hak was enjoying a hot bath when Yulji appeared and reported that he had found the bodies in the forest again. The man ordered him to keep his eyes on the forest and that he wanted to personally interrogate this hunter. Yulji stated that so far this hunter has never left any trace, that apparently he is very dangerous, and there is no telling what we can expect from him. The Lord looked at him and asked if he thought this hunter had been sent by someone in the royal family. The man didn't say anything but put his hand in his breast pocket and searched for something. He held out to the Lord the small metal symbol worn by all members of the Lord's Ghost Squad. It meant that one of his men could be a traitor. Seo Ji-hak turned the symbol in his hands and said that he personally selected all the people in his secret squad, and they all followed him from the capital. So he didn't believe it could be true. Yulji agreed and said it looked more like a fake, but they still shouldn't let their guard down. The man suggested that someone else might have created a similar elite unit to mislead the Lord. Seo Ji-hak tightly clenched the symbol in his fist and replied that in such a case he would like to catch it even more and look him in the eye. He grinned maliciously and said that no one dare pretend to be members of his ghostly squad and try to get him to bared his fangs at his own pack. The sun was already setting over the horizon. Yunha sat and chatted cheerfully with her friends. She wrote hieroglyphics on Gari's arm, and the girl laughed, barely restrained from tickling herself. On the girl's hand were written in ink the hieroglyphics of her name, meaning beautiful pear. She explained that her mom, when she was pregnant, loved pears so much that she named her after them. Gari said she wanted to see how to spell her name because she wasn't literate. Horim laughed merrily, which made the girl embarrassed and blushing. Then he rolled up his sleeve and asked Unha to now write his name on his arm. He wondered how she would interpret the hieroglyphics of his name. The friends were laughing merrily and didn't notice another person appearing. Seo Ji-hak quietly approached and asked what they were doing, and the young men immediately jumped up and bowed in greeting. The man looked at the girl expectantly. Una replied that she was merely writing their names on her hands and parsing the meaning of the hieroglyphics. Suddenly, a man came over and sat down next to her. He smiled and put his hand under his chin and told her to write his name too. The girl opened her mouth in surprise. Noticing her confusion, he asked if she knew the meaning of his name. He said he'd be interested in what she'd write. When they were alone, the girl dipped her brush in the ink and tried to keep her hand from shaking. She was embarrassed and told the man not to take offense at her if she interpreted his name incorrectly. After all, names are a very complex subject, and much depends on the character of the person and the fact that hieroglyphs can be interpreted differently. Seo Ji-hak smiled and said he wouldn't do it. He only asked that it not be mocked, and the girl took offense. How could he think she would joke about him like that? Seeing the girl blush and become indignant, the man laughed heartily. Una froze. She had never seen a man laugh so heartily and openly. It was obvious that he was at ease with her and enjoying himself. He was so handsome that the girl blushed and pretended to look for paper to hide her flaming face. Suddenly, he rolled up his sleeve and exposed his forearm, saying she could write on it. The girl took the brush and with light strokes began to write the hieroglyphics of his name on his skin. The man read, "A crane approaching the water." He asked her to explain why she interpreted it that way. Una explained that she gave the meaning of Ji as an island in the middle of a lake, and Hawk as a white crane standing on it. She said she sees him walking on a thin line all the time. He is always watching the turbulent current around him, but assesses the situation soberly and acts only at the right moment. Yet he looks sad and lonely, standing there proudly alone. It's a beautiful picture a girl can see every time she closes her eyes and thinks of him. The man listened attentively to the girl, and it was obvious that she touched some strings in his soul. He said that she guessed one character correctly. Before she knew it, he pulled her into his arms and took the brush from her hands. Seo Ji-hak rolled up her sleeve and began to write the characters of his name on her forearm, explaining that she had guessed the symbol G. But Hak is interpreted as a person who values and maintains his honesty. He then asked her to write her own name. The girl wrote hieroglyphics and said her name was interpreted as the end of a nice day. She explained that her father gave her that name in the hope that she would live a peaceful life, but she's not sure if it worked. She leaned against the man's chest and said sadly that she had hardly had many peaceful days in her life. Seo Ji-hak sat down so that the girl could lie on top of him and hugged her, asking if this moment could not be called peaceful and happy. Suddenly, he asked what kind of man her father was. The girl said that her father was a book reader and that he had a gentle nature and loved children very much. He really loved what he did, but unfortunately, he was executed for alleged harassment a woman. Her eyes filled with tears and pain. The man quietly said he believed her father was a good man and that he was sorry his fate had turned out so sadly. Then he gently took her face in his hands and turned her so that he could kiss her. Una reached for the bottle of wine and took a couple of sips straight from the neck and wiped her mouth with her hand. She looked down at the man. Seo Ji-hak watched her with interest and said that she was acting unusual again. Usually he's the one who gets drunk and pesters her. The girl said she had heard that lately. The Lord often throws drinking parties for nobles and officials and invites Kasangs. The man smiled slyly and said that if she was so jealous and didn't want him to attend such parties, she should stop trying to run away from him and having fun with him. Yoongi's trembling hands tied the hanbok while Yoon lay looking at her with a sidelong glance. The girl froze when she heard movement behind her back. The man got out of bed and said that she shouldn't make such an unhappy expression on her face after leaving his bedroom. Then he handed her a hair clip and said she could have it as a reward for the night she spent with him. Seeing the disdain with which the girl looked at him, Yoon's gaze hardened. Yoongi turned away and said that a girl like her shouldn't be given jewelry. She didn't deserve it. She had already stood up and was about to leave when suddenly she felt a firm grip on her arm, and she was abruptly turned round as she did so. The man sat relaxed. Only his gaze said he was angry. He asked if she still had any hope of escape. He said that even if she got the chance, he was sure she'd be dead before she could get out of town. The man said that even if she thought this house was a dungeon for her, it was the only place she could be safe. Yoongi looked at the man, and suddenly memories of a recent conversation with the girl popped into her head. She advised her to stop doing stupid things and act cunningly and try to gain the trust of these people. To let their guard down and escape to freedom was her plan. Unexpectedly for Yoon, the girl softened and said that she hasn't tried to run away from him for a long time. She said that she was really used to living in his house and that she was much more comfortable here compared to Kisang's house. Hearing this, the man thought it sounded strange and unexpected, but maybe the girl had really calmed down. He brushed a loose strand of her hair and asked her if she wanted to see her sister. Yoongi was wary but didn't show it, only looked up at him in surprise. Yoon kept stroking her and said he would try to repay her for her understanding. Horim walked cheerfully towards Una's room, wanting to have tea together. Suddenly, he heard the voice of Gari, who appeared out of nowhere and shouted at him not to disturb the girl. The young man stared incomprehensibly and asked if the girl was busy. Gari replied out of breath that the girl was now spending time with the Lord and that the two of them should probably stay out of the way. Una sat at the man's feet and was embarrassed while he gently braided her braid. She tried to convince him she could do it herself, but the man said he wanted to court her. Seo Ji-hak smiled, noticing how cute she was being embarrassed. He hugged the girl from behind and said he wanted to thank her like a true gentleman, because it makes him feel good that a girl put her heart into a gift for him. She painted a picture of a crane soaring through the sky. Una got embarrassed and said she was sorry she couldn't prepare a better birthday present for him. The man looked at her and said that he hoped she had never given anyone else such a gift, because she had written a poem for him and he did not want anyone else to receive such a gift from her. He said that otherwise he would be very jealous, and the girl, blushing, hastened to assure him that he was the only one. Una watched how sincerely and easily he smiled at her, and realized that lately he had become more sincere and open with her, and smiled more often than before. She lowered her head and thought about how she was afraid that after that incident he would finally stop trusting her. Then suddenly she asked the man if he could check on her sister. She said she was very worried about her. The girl asked if perhaps she could go to the meeting with him if he would let her. Seo Ji-hak tensed up a little and thought about her request. A man sat at the head of the table and smirked and asked the audience why they were looking at him as if he had blood all over his face. Suddenly, everyone around them was silent for a few moments. The tension in the room was palpable. Suddenly, everyone started praising the prince, saying that he looked great, and that they had heard that he had recently killed a mountain tiger, and that he had even killed a band of hired killers afterwards. When Seo Ji-hak heard one of the men mention that he had heard that Lord had hired a book reader for himself, he tensed and gave in forward. The village chief's third son, Choi Young-hung, who has barely touched a drink, said he heard that the Lord's reader knows the Western language, but he worries whether she is deceiving him because as far as the man knows, there is only one person in their village who knows the Western language, and he lives in the village chief's house. He suggested we get together sometime and give this girl a test. Suddenly, one of the intoxicated officials said that he had heard that the prince enjoyed more than just reading from this girl, and laughed and asked if she tasted good since such an important man was lavishing his attention on her. Seo Ji-hak first smiled slyly and then burst out laughing loudly. Then he suddenly asked if the man liked the taste of the food he was eating with such pleasure. The official was silent for a moment and then replied that he had never eaten anything tastier in his life. When the man supposed it was beef, the prince took a drink of wine and knocked his glass over on the table with a clatter. When the man supposed it was beef, the prince took a drink of wine and knocked his glass over on the table with a clatter. The lord stood up and looked ominously around the hushed men and then said that each of them should remember this taste well and think, for they would soon know the answer. Una was wandering around the courtyard of the villa when she noticed that the lord had joined his guests and started drinking too. She felt sad and hurt because he had promised not to go to those parties if she stayed with him. She was about to leave when she heard a rumble and a noise. The girl had time to meet the man's eyes but sat down anyway, hoping that he hadn't noticed her in time and might not go looking for her. But to her misfortune, a few moments later, Seo Ji-hak came to the gate and looked at her pathetic attempt to hide behind a pillar. He asked the girl why she was prowling around like a rat. Then he helped the girl to her feet and said he thought it was some stupid assassin hanging around trying to kill him. The man pressed the girl against his chest and asked why her cheeks were suddenly so red. She tried to break free from his embrace, but was unsuccessful. Then suddenly he said she was the one who came to him first, and without giving her a chance to respond, he kissed her. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. At first, she gave in to his onslaught, but then she remembered that there were many people around them and sharply pushed him away. Una tried to catch her breath and stood with her arms outstretched so the man wouldn't reach for her again. Seo Ji-hak ran his finger over the lower lip that the girl had bitten him on. The girl hissed at him to stop acting like that or they might be seen. The man smirked and said that if these people bothered her so much, he would go and take their lives now. He was about to turn round when he felt the girl grab his arm and stop him. Una looked at him with her big, innocent eyes and thought that if she told him that she was afraid to be alone in this darkness, he would hardly believe her. The man sat tied to a chair and, exhausted from the torture, tried to gulp air with his mouth. He looked at Yulia defiantly and said that he would not be able to get any information out of him and that he should not waste his time on him. When the man heard the cheeky man say they would wipe out the royal family by the roots, he wanted to reach for his sword, but he was beaten to it. Seo Ji-hak grabbed his warrior's sword and stared at the captive nonchalantly. He looked at him and saw that he wasn't going to give up, so he came closer and said he was going to tell him one thing. Swinging his sword, the man said that none of the members of his elite ghost squad had died yet, and that was because they were under his command. The blade struck the captive gently. Yulja stepped forward, trying to say something to the lord. He turned to the warrior and said that he knew he was not worthy of the throne, but if it turned out that his uncle was behind all this, he would take it as a direct betrayal of the royal family. The man was sure that his uncle's schemes would cause him to create a bloody lake around him. He wants Seo Ji-hak out of the way more than anything to get his son ahead, so he allows himself to act like that. The prince walked out with his hands folded behind his back and said with a smirk that it was getting interesting. He ordered Yulia to find where his uncle was hiding and bring him immediately. To be continued.